Good night, Malaysian 370. Those were the final words from the cockpit. They were perfectly standard radio procedure for a flight handing off to a new air traffic control sector. There was no panic, no distress call, and no indication that anything was wrong. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 lifted off from Kuala Lumpur, carrying 227 passengers and 12 crew members. It was operating as a completely routine commercial service. The intended destination was Beijing. The pilots were flying a standard overnight route north across the South China Sea. But within minutes of that routine sign-off, right as the plane reached Waypoint Igari, the flight's transponder stopped transmitting. The aircraft disappeared entirely from civilian radar screens. The immediate assumption was a sudden crash at that location. But later reconstructions using military radar and satellite data revealed a different reality. The aircraft did not go down in the South China Sea. It kept flying for hours in complete radio silence. The stark contrast between a perfectly normal sign-off and a total communication blackout is the foundation of this mystery. Something happened in those few minutes to sever contact and pull the flight off its scheduled course. Primary military radar captured what civilian air traffic control missed. This map shows the filed flight plan in red. The white line reveals the actual path of the aircraft, a sharp deviation turning the plane west, back across the Malay Peninsula. Even with the transponder off, a separate satellite communication system on board continued to function. It sent automated electronic pings, often called handshakes, once an hour. By analyzing those pings, researchers tracked the plane's final hours. They plotted a series of arcs sweeping south, charting a path deep into the remote southern Indian Ocean. Then, digital data was matched by physical evidence. In 2015, a piece of an aircraft wing known as a Flaperon washed ashore on Reunion Island. In the months that followed, search teams recovered multiple pieces of debris along the eastern coast of Africa. Investigators officially matched these fragments to Flight 370, confirming a violent impact in the western Indian Ocean. The debris confirms exactly where the aircraft ended up, but without the flight data recorders from the main wreckage, the fragments offer no definitive answers about why it flew there. To bridge that gap, investigators examined two main scenarios. The first theory suggests the disappearance was a deliberate act by someone who had control over the aircraft. The timing of the initial turn is highly precise, occurring right at the boundary between two air traffic control zones. Disabling the transponder and routing the plane across specific navigational waypoints requires exact professional aviation knowledge. Scrutiny naturally fell on the flight crew. Data recovered from the captain's home flight simulator contained a plotted route that terminated in the southern Indian Ocean. Early public reports framed this as absolute proof of a plan. However, official safety investigators clarified that possessing a simulated route does not, on its own, establish a motive or confirm a murder-suicide scenario. The flight path implies intentional steering during the initial diversion, yet no group ever claimed responsibility, and no clear motive was established, leaving deliberate human action as an unproven theory. The second path looks at the possibility of a sudden, catastrophic emergency, such as a severe electrical fire or a rapid decompression that rendered the crew immediately unconscious. A major systemic failure explains the sudden loss of communication systems. If the pilots managed to set a return course before passing out, the aircraft's autopilot could take over the flight. This creates what aviation experts call a ghost flight. With everyone on board incapacitated, the automated systems keep the plane flying in a straight line until the fuel tanks run completely dry. It is a chilling prospect, a massive Boeing 777 cruising silently through the dark for 7 straight hours, completely out of reach, flying thousands of miles out over open water. The ghost flight scenario aligns perfectly with the steady track recorded by the satellites and explains the radio silence without requiring malicious intent. It illustrates how a critical system failure can turn a modern jetliner into its own tomb. We are now years removed from the initial disappearance, and despite the most extensive deep-sea search in history, the main aircraft wreckage and the flight recorders have never been recovered. The final safety reports outline a frustrating reality. Investigators confidently proved the aircraft diverted from its filed route, but they simply lack the physical evidence to determine exactly what caused the diversion. Those black boxes, locked somewhere in the deep ocean, are the only tools that can separate theory from fact. Only they can confirm whether this was the result of a mechanical catastrophe or human intervention. The search covered tens of thousands of square miles, but for the families of the 239 people on board, the absence of a definitive answer leaves an open wound that time alone cannot heal. The disappearance remains a singular event in the history of flight, a moment where a massive aircraft, monitored by radar and tracked by satellites, simply drifted into the unknown and never returned.